we have many questions about Jay Powell's tenure, your firsthand experience, but I do have to start with what's happening here in the bond market. This is overwhelming the stock market today. Is this everything about the PPI, CPI we saw this week? Is it about the concern of it getting worse because of a closed Strait of Hormuz, or is there more going on here?
Well, I think there are a number of things going on. Obviously, there's some carryover from overseas where the UK government dynamics are carrying over into the US at the very long end. But as you say, both CPI coming in very hot and PPI, input prices, freight, suggesting that we're going to see additional pressures, upward pressures on consumer inflation in the months ahead. And of course, really very few people expect the Strait of Hormuz to be open and that oil to be moving into global markets, certainly not before the end of May, probably not well into the summer. And that means that as Kevin Warsh enters the Fed, it is a inflationary set of risks that he has to contend with.
Well, therefore making it very difficult to pursue rate cuts. But how high is the bar in your mind to actually tighten policy further? How hard would it be to hike rates knowing that this also could ripple down and have a potentially negative growth impact?
Well, I think the day one job for Kevin Warsh walking into the Federal Reserve is to move the Fed away from the easing bias that has now been in place since late last year. It's no longer appropriate. We've had a massive inflationary shock. It's piling on top of earlier inflationary shocks, and we're seeing that core PC inflation is moving up, likely to come in around 3.3%. So the first business for Kevin Warsh is to actually move away from that easing bias. And of course, that's exactly the reverse of the reason the president gave for trying so hard to replace Jay Powell.
I was taken by your op-ed in the FT, in which you talk about inflation pressures in the future. When people expect inflation to persist, you write, it tends to change pricing behavior by businesses, and a temporary shock becomes a persistent one. You know about this because you've lived it. What does it mean for the second half of this year?
Well, I think we started to see some of that in the PPI data with margins going up.
Okay.
And that is the kind of behavior when consumers expect gas prices to keep going up, then those gas station margins can go up as well. We are seeing it in freight costs. Everything is going to be affected by diesel, packaging costs for food. So we still have some inflationary pressure coming for the consumer in the months ahead. And when I talk to consumers, and you can see it in the consumer surveys, their inflation expectations have jumped much higher, but they also just are very resigned to prices never coming back down. So they say, I hear about tariff refunds. I'm never going to see those refunds in lower prices. I see gas prices going up. When am I actually going to see some relief? So I think that concern about a series of supply shocks really leading into changing inflation expectations is one that the Fed has to show they're taking seriously.
Yeah. Well, and of course, for consumers, if your wages are not keeping up with this, it feeds into the sentiment downdraft we have been experiencing. We saw that borne out in the CPI with wages being outpaced by inflation for the first time in 3 years. When do you expect that this starts to have a greater impact on the economy itself, on consumer demand overall, on demand for labor as the Fed contends with the other part of its dual mandate?
Well, what's interesting, as you said, average hourly earnings actually negative for the first time in a very long time this month. And it does affect consumers on the lower end. So what we are seeing, I think, with consumers on the lower end, I hear from them that they are using, where they have access to credit, they're using credit more. They're running down their buffers. When you look at those overall retail sales numbers, though, those were very strong, I would say, given where we are with oil prices. And that just speaks to the K-shaped economy, the very top of the consumer income kind of distribution, really driving that ongoing uplift to consumption. So that's why we're seeing, I think, this big vibe chasm, consumer sentiment being extremely negative, but consumers continuing to power growth.
Speak to the significance of this day for Jay Powell. I don't know what happens inside the Fed on a chair's last day. Are there fireworks? Is there a cake? We're wondering. Maybe there's an official handling of the gavel. But as we recall the stylings of Jay Powell and the challenges he faced in dealing with this administration, will the relationship between the chair and the president ever be the same again?
Well, I think that will be the biggest legacy of Chair Jerome Powell, is just the integrity with which he led this institution and really protected its independence during a time when the president mounted a series of unprecedented actions, firing a governor, undertaking a criminal investigation. So I think the chair's legacy is really going to be around preserving the independence of the Federal Reserve. And I think he actually gives Kevin Warsh a much stronger position to start from than might have been the case otherwise.
But what does it do to Kevin Warsh's starting position that Chairman Powell's still going to be hanging around, not as chair, but as a governor? He says he wants to keep a low profile, but what impact do you expect that will have inside the Fed?
Well, I certainly know from working with Chair Powell when he was Governor Powell that he's very constructive. As he said, he will be low profile. I really expect that to be the case. So I imagine, and he of course worked with Governor Kevin Warsh, I expect that they'll establish a good working relationship. What it means, of course, is that the consistent dissenter, the CEA chair for President Trump, Stephen Myron, is rotating off, at least for the time being. And so that actually makes Kevin Warsh's job a little bit easier if, in fact, he decides he is going to move away from that easing bias and recognize there may be two-sided risks to rates.
Speak about the cultural shift inside the Fed when a new chair shows up. This is obviously a very close group of people. You go behind closed doors and make very difficult decisions, but I'm sure that there's a camaraderie there and a style that's impacted by a new person holding the gavel.
Well, the staff are absolute professionals. I mean, these are people who have deep expertise, but they understand that they are providing advice and depth. But the policymakers, the chair, is leading on policy. And so they will offer up that same sage advice, uncolored by their own views, to the incoming chair. And similarly, I think board members and the regional presidents tend to be very serious. They take the data very seriously. You've heard how they're parsing the data right now, how they themselves are shifting, but they are also very collegial.
Well, of course, a lot of conversations do happen behind closed doors, but we also hear frequently from Fed governors or officials on the FOMC, and it seems Kevin Warsh thinks it maybe is too frequent, at least judging by his testimony in his confirmation hearing, not even just in terms of speeches and the like, but in putting out a summary of economic projections, for example. I wonder what you think we might expect in terms of a shift in the, at the very least, amount of guidance that financial markets are given by the Fed.
It is possible, given that he will now be making the recommendations on the statement and will also be making recommendations on what kinds of communications the committee's making. There are a number of things he could do. He could decide to put forward a statement that doesn't include forward guidance at all. He could decide to drop his press conferences or move to every second press conference. He could guide the committee over time to decide to no longer issue summaries of economic projections. So those are all things that he could do. The question mark, yeah, so I think that is the question mark if in fact he wants to be leading the Fed and providing that voice that is the kind of preeminent voice on Fed policy. He may find that he wants some of those tools. And in particular, the every meeting press conference has raised the chair's voice relative to other members.
We all remember trying to gauge what Alan Greenspan was going to say based on how fat his briefcase was. We would have paid good money for a news conference back then. Do you expect that regular news conferences will follow each meeting?
I think that was one of the question marks that his testimony left open. What he won't be able to change is the number of times that the regional presidents and board members speak.
Right.
And so it would be, I think, to his disadvantage to retreat from the field and leave the markets to interpret based on other members of the committee
Says a lot.
alone.
Yeah.